Good morning, everybody. This is What Does the Bible Say? This is our morning edition where we are going through, our school edition where we have been going through the Old Testament text. The thing that I want to say this morning is as soon as we get out of the gate, Daniel and the book of Esther. We read these books and people just have them scattered around and detached from each other, and I understand because Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther comes way, like I'm saying, in the way that we would normally read our Bible. Esther comes way before any of the prophets. And you say, well, that just doesn't make sense to me, and I get it, but that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Some of the chronology of it, and then why we even have the book. But this is what I want to say just on the front end. This is, you got your little baby Bible, and your little baby Bible matches your big wide margin, King James wide margin. People, Christians, need to change the way they think about reading the Bible. And what I mean by that is, like someone says, well, it's a privilege that we get to read the Bible. It's not a have to. Well, that's not even what I'm talking about. That's true. But this is my thing. The people, even the people who would say it that way, it's a privilege. It is a privilege. But those same people, I have to ask, are they reading the Bible or are they just fixated on a handful of passages? Now, this is what I'm getting at. People who read literature, and I'm saying they read like classic novels, the book of Esther is only 10 chapters long. And as you're talking about reading a story, and there's nothing wrong with saying Bible story. Artaxerxes and Xerxes Ahasuerus are fixed in the world's history. It's not fiction. It's actual history. But here's the thing. You are reading the story of Mordecai and Esther, Ahasuerus, and Haman. And you are reading conflict and drama and tension. And this is what I'm getting at. Anybody who says that the Bible is not interesting to read is out of their mind. They don't have good reading comprehension. Reading is a skill that is developed like anything else. It's a muscle. It's like you say, well, I go into the gym and I'm going to start bench pressing just a ridiculous amount of weight on my very first day ever in a gym. Not going to happen. Same thing with investing. It's like someone says, well, I want to have like a boatload of money. It's like on your very first day of investing. Going to school, I want to know everything. On the first day of school, the book of Esther, y'all, develop your reading so that you can enjoy the story and finding, we're not talking about being crazy and finding cryptic messages hidden inside of the book of Esther, but we are saying the moral of the story, being able to take something away from it. Now, here's another one about the book of Esther, and I'm saying good literature, interesting reading. The Bible is not dry. When I was a kid, and I do want to say this too, now that I'm on that, you and your children, my wife and I still have this ongoing conversation about just how much our 2-year-old can perceive. And I think that he picks up on way more than people are giving credit for. But this is what I want to say. When I was a kid, we had VHS tapes of these animated Bible stories. And we didn't have the whole set. We only had a handful. But of the handful that we had, Esther was my favorite. And when I would watch the animated story on VHS of the book of Esther, I would watch it, and Haman, who is the bad guy, was my favorite character. I'm a kid. I'm not picking up on everything that is happening in the story. Okay, but I can remember certain scenes of that animated VHS for Haman and Mordecai, and the animation that they came up with, Haman telling Mordecai, bow to me, Mordecai, and he won't do it. So that's a kid, and this is why I say about what kids pick up on. That's me. I don't know anything. I'm a child, and I'm watching this, and for some reason, the villain is my favorite character. So do you know, and I didn't know this as a child, do you know that Alfred Hitchcock, who made movies, Alfred Hitchcock said, of any story, he said, if you have a fantastic villain, you will have a fantastic movie. And I'll be honest, now that I'm a grown person, when I watch movies, it's usually like the villain is who's holding my attention. And so you read, and obviously I root for the good guy and I like the good guy. But when you're reading Esther, I mean, you've got everything in there. You've got all the elements for what Alfred Hitchcock would say makes a good movie. And we'll have more to say about that and later on. Is that fine that I introduce the book and say, hey, you say, well, and let me talk about these people who say, I don't like reading the Old Testament, it's dry. What? And I'm saying this, are you acting as if somehow that Leviticus is anything akin to the book of Esther? I hear you saying, I don't want to read the book of Leviticus. I hear you. And I understand why you're saying that. But now I'm asking you, well, are you reading like the book of Esther? And they said, no. Well, why? Because I hear you when you say that you don't want to read Leviticus because it's dry. You don't want to read Deuteronomy because it's a bunch of rules. Hey, those rules are good to live by, and your kids need to know those rules. And you say, well, I'm not going to read Chronicles, just a bunch of genealogies. This man begat this man. For 3 chapters, skip them. Read the rest of the story. Are you reading the story? Because this is classic literature, and it's drama, and there's loads of application in here to help you with your day-to-day living, and we will talk about that this morning. So, does that make sense? Hey, if nothing else, the Bible ought to be recommended as classic literature. Even these people who say, I don't know about inspiration of the text. Okay. I mean, there's no denying it's classic literature. So, that's what we're doing today, and we're going to have more principles and moral, and we're taking application away from the story. As we get going, 276-806-3641, that's my cell phone number. CalebGRobertson@gmail.com, and I'll say this about the book of Esther. This is my email, CalebGRobertson@gmail.com. If you're a regular student of the Tuesday morning Bible classes, but you don't get the Informer, so probably this upcoming Sunday, the Informer will be about Haman in the book of Esther. So if you're a regular student in the Bible class, then I would suggest getting on the Informer list, because it might be the case that I have an idea, I don't get to it in class, so I put it in the Informer. Well, then you want it to go with your notes. So email me, CalebGRobertson@gmail.com. We'll put you on the Informer list. And then let your friends know about YouTube. What does the Bible say on YouTube? YouTube Johnny Robertson. Purple white banner. That's my dad's name. That's my dad's picture. The watch live icon. You'll have the playlist, videos that we've uploaded, and live broadcasts that we've done, and all that is for free. And we have multiple lessons that are coming out on a daily basis. So Sunday night we had the live broadcast, but Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock we uploaded the sermon. Let me find it. Uploaded the sermon from Sunday morning from Joey Nichols, and he discussed, Joey Nichols is one of the men in the local congregation, and he did not go to preaching school. So when you watch his stuff and you say, oh, this guy's doing a good job, you need to make a note of that he did not go to preaching school. And that's where I say, men who will be serious, like Joey puts in a serious study. He's been living for years in a serious congregation, and now he's presenting very serious material. And here's the question he asked: did Jesus really preach on hell more than he did heaven? And I'm saying that should be getting shared on Facebook and other platforms more than it is. He had a line in here where he said, you'll hear Christians say to other people, Jesus preached on hell more than he preached on heaven. And Joey said, they say that as if it's something that they themselves should be proud of. Like, how is that a badge? Jesus was not presenting himself to the audiences as an individual who wanted to send them to hell. He had compassion on the people. Matthew chapter 23, he says, how often would I have gathered you under my wings as a hen does its chicks? And he said, and you rejected me, you resisted me. Did Jesus really preach on hell more than he did heaven? So you got all these things there for your benefit. Now, let's see. And then I say this, all designed to better help you know your Bible without moving across America. This was a couple years ago, I sat down with David Hill. He's the president of the Tennessee Bible College, and one of the things that he said to me was, he said, the days of brick and mortar schools are gone. And I don't mind that. And the idea that individuals have to uproot their family for a 2-year window and go somewhere to get a Bible education is, think is ridiculous because a lot of you are not going to get a very good Bible education at the schools right now. And so I say better help you know your Bible without moving across America. And also if you go to any of the schools that we have, they're not really promoting evangelism. What they're doing is promoting a political campaign to get meetings, which is extra money attached to your regular congregational salary, and it's getting your name out there. Meetings, lectureships, just stuff to help you climb to go to bigger and bigger congregations where the preachers get bigger and bigger salaries. And the reason the schools want the preachers to get bigger and bigger salaries is because they want the preacher to then get the school into the budget. I just want to help you better know the Bible. I'm getting to study the text, and then I get to come in here and talk to you about it. Now, this is what I want to open up with, the book of Esther. You say, we've already seen this slide. That's okay. Knowing your Bible versus knowing a handful of arguments, okay? This man, here's the Old Testament book that I keep recommending. He Loves Forever. The Message of the Old Testament by Tom Albright. And Tom Albright said about his dad and his granddad. He said, my granddad only ever looked at his Bible to figure out arguments. Like he heard something in a worship assembly, heard it in a sermon. He said, granddad rush home, just start scouring for, one teacher said, that's a conclusion that's in search of some evidence. What does that mean? You had your mind made up before you even started looking. And he said that's how his granddad was. He knew what he believed. He started getting in there to find if he could get some scriptures to back up what he already believed. And then he said, and my dad just studied to make sure he came down on the right side with my granddad. Now, I don't want to be that way. I want to read my Bible because it is good for me. It's going to be good for my children. And I read the Bible because, as I said a moment ago, it does make for good literature. It's good reading. So I just say that to people who say, I just don't know where I stand about even believing in God. Well, if you're someone who enjoys reading, then it makes for good reading. Now, here's what we did a couple weeks ago. When you get to Daniel chapter 6, and basically the Medes and the Persians are taking over Babylon, that happens at the end of Daniel chapter 5. The Persian takeover of Babylon happens at the end of Daniel chapter 5, and you're really getting into Persian kings, Daniel 6. Well, when you find that it's King Darius in Daniel chapter 6, well, if you find that Darius is ruling over Persia, then that means that Cyrus has already ruled and basically ended his reign. And so if Cyrus comes before Darius in Daniel 6, then this is what that means. When I reach Daniel chapter 6, I ought to stop and I ought to study the first 4 chapters of the book of Ezra. Because before Darius, in Daniel 6, Darius sends Daniel to the lion's den. Before that happens, King Cyrus is going to send a collection of Hebrews back to Jerusalem, and they're going to lay the foundation of a new temple, Ezra chapter 1 through 4. But when you get to the end of chapter 4, the work stops, and when you get to Ezra chapter 5, it just specifically says that 2 prophets come in named Haggai and Zechariah, and they tell the people, get back to work. And I include Malachi because he discusses all the same things that Haggai and Zechariah are talking about. So I don't see any sense in pushing him off into the distance. So here's what they have. Ezra 4, the work of the house of God ceased. Ezra 5, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet. And Haggai says this. He says, you dwell in your finished houses, but you have left the house of God unfinished. So he says, get back to work. Zechariah 1, he says, therefore I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies, and my house shall be built. Well, you guys stop building the house, you need to get back to work. So that's what we're seeing. Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi are not just out there floating. Who knows what they're talking about? Who knows why we even have it? No. These are like a subtext to the book of Daniel. Ezra, subtext to the book of Daniel. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, subtext. You get what I'm saying? Like you have an outline. Here's your main point. Here are bullet points that go with it. It assists. Now, you have that, but here's what I want to talk about today. You get the same thing in Ezra chapter 6 and 7 with the book of Esther. Now, I'm going to explain this, but I want to, these introduction notes where we have to do chronology and the timeline, and it's just like data. I don't always enjoy that because I always wonder if people are keeping up with it, but here's my thing. This is the stuff that causes people to say, I don't want to read the Old Testament. And I ask them, why? And they say, because I never know what's going on. Well, why do they not know what's going on? Because the books aren't in order. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, and you're getting way over here and it's like Isaiah. Well, we've already studied Isaiah. I get it. But now I'm trying to help you get them in order so that you can do your reading the way it should be done, and people then start kind of like zoning out because I say it's just data. Okay, look at this. Ezra 6 and 7, between the last verse of Ezra 6 and the first verse of Ezra 7 is the whole book of Esther. And this is the way that I would build it. In Ezra chapter 4, verses 5 through 7, we get this note of the kings of Persia. Now, let me have a moment. And here's what it says. It says, "And they hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem." And it says, "And then in the days of Artaxerxes." So in Ezra 4, like if this has any type of accurate timeline, then this is what we have. You have Cyrus, Darius, Ahasuerus, and then Artaxerxes. Look, we used to joke, Artaxerxes, sometimes Ahasuerus is just called Xerxes, and guys would get in the book and they'd start reading it and they'd say Xerx. Look, the pronunciations, these are odd names, so don't lose your head. Artaxerxes, if this has any type of like realism to their timeline, then this is what we have. We have Darius at the end of Ezra chapter 6, and then when we start picking up in Ezra 7, we're in the reign of Artaxerxes, which means what? That sandwiched in between those two chapters is Ahasuerus in the story of Esther. Here it is. Ezra 6:15. "And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king." Here's Ezra 7:1 and then verse number 8. "Now after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra the son," then he comes in. And it says in verse number 8 that he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king, King Artaxerxes. And that's going to be important in just a moment. But do you see this? If this has any real sense, Cyrus, Darius, Ahasuerus, Artaxerxes, and then I come over here and we're leaving Darius and we're going straight into Artaxerxes, and that means between chapter 6 and 7 is the book of Esther. It matters. Now, here's what you get with Nehemiah. So do you sing? I tell you this, if y'all are not singing the books of the Bible with your kids, I am 30 years old. That is still a fundamental of how I memorize the books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, John. If you're not doing that with your kids, and it's like, it's nothing that you brag about, hey, my little boy can sing the books of the Bible. It's helpful when you're 30 years old and you can't remember where goes what, and you say to yourself, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job. Here's the thing. Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Esther. It doesn't matter that the book of Esther inside of your Bible comes after the book of Nehemiah. In actuality, it's Ezra 7, just its own unit is the book of Esther, and then you're going to pick up with Nehemiah later. Here's Ezra 7, verse number 8. What does it say? He came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was the 7th year of the king Artaxerxes. When does the book of Nehemiah come in? It came to pass in the month in the 12th year of Artaxerxes the king. Look, this is after the book of Esther. This is after Esther. This is after Esther. So what does it mean? It means that if you're a person who says, I don't read the Old Testament because I never know where anything's supposed to be, the Bible's not in chronological order, I never know what's going on, I never know who the players are. Look, this one is big. This lets you know who the players are. Cyrus, Darius, Ahasuerus, and then Artaxerxes. And you just do it right here. If that one in, what was it, chapter 4 has any realism, then I sandwich it between the two. And then I recognize between Nehemiah 2 in the 20th year of Artaxerxes versus the 7th year of Artaxerxes, the book of Esther should be read that way. I stop at Ezra 7, I read Esther, I finish the book of Ezra, and then I begin Nehemiah. Now, that's just our introduction. We're going to talk about the real idea of the book, okay? Does that help you with your chronology? Let's talk about these two books again. He Loves Forever. The Message of the Old Testament. He Loves Forever by Tom Albright. Yes, if you can find it and it's not overly expensive, you ought to get it. It's an itty-bitty book. It will help you tremendously. You can put it in your coat pocket, read it, take it with you and really make your way through it. Think about it. Hurlbut story of the Bible. You're reading it to your kids, but the parents are benefiting. The kids are getting the stories, they're benefiting, and it's quality time for parents and their kids. Quality time, everybody's benefiting, right? And the thing about Jesse Lyman Hurlbut wrote this book, and the thing that his son said years later was, he said, my dad was very dedicated to just telling the story as the Bible tells a story. He said, my dad went out of his way, worked really hard to not try to slip in doctrinal speculations, theories. It's just getting the story. Now, let me ask you about this in the book of Esther. Okay, you got your timeline down, you made your notes. Let's talk about Esther. Did you know that Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God? Doesn't have the name God, anything about that. It's just Hebrews under the Persian reign, and it doesn't even mention God. To my knowledge, and I'll say this too, go back to Joey's sermon. Do you know, people who use that line, did Jesus preach on hell more than he did heaven? I would say 90% of people who keep repeating that have no clue. They just heard a preacher say it one time and they just keep parroting it. But the individuals who are actually going through and looking at the substance of Jesus' message, was he really out there promoting this, burn in hell theology, or was he out there talking to the people about half what they already knew from the law of Moses, and him saying, I am here to deliver you from your guilt, your trespasses, and give you peace. Take my yoke upon you, my burden is light. My burden is light, burn in hell. Just see what I'm saying? This is like a tagline that just got thrown all over the place. And these are taglines about the book of Esther. Someone comes into Bible class, you start a Bible class, someone says, did you know that Esther never mentions God? Did you know that Esther is never mentioned in the New Testament? John 5, verse number 9, it's speculated and believed that Jesus participated in a feast that begins in the book of Esther, the Feast of Purim, Esther 9:21. And then someone says Esther was the only book not represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They got multiple caves, caverns, where they're discovering these sealed up Old Testament texts, massively antiquated Old Testament texts, and they get through there. And some they found whole books of the Old Testament text. Some were consistent fragments. But then you go through the whole thing. The book of Esther is not represented. Somebody hears that and they said, that kind of makes me wonder if it's not even supposed to be in the Bible. If you read, and I think that you should read it, General Biblical Introduction by Geisler and Nix. It's a great big thick book with a blue dust jacket. They have these notes in there, and it's just, read it, but I'm just saying this. Someone said this, and they don't know, but someone says, the reason that Esther's not in the New Testament is because Esther didn't mention God, so God kept Esther out of the New Testament. Same thing for Dead Sea Scrolls. Esther kept God out of the book, and then God kept it out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You don't know that. Don't listen to these people just speculating, conjuring up nonsense. Josephus, who everybody acknowledges, Josephus, the Jewish historian, he accepted Esther as part of Old Testament canon. And so someone says, well, what does that mean? At some point, someone's going to have to reflect the thought of the day. And I have to ask this question. If no one back then had a problem with it, I don't know why I would have a problem with it. If it's going to be in the Septuagint, which is going to be the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, well, if that was already part of the Hebrew text, and then it becomes attached to it, I don't understand why that we would make bones about it. But this is my thing. Do you honestly think that that's how God intends a Bible class on the book of Esther to go? Study textual criticism, I'm all for that. Study histories of the text, I'm all for that. Those are apologetic discussions, and I'm all for apologetics, but I did see a good quote from Jack Wilkie some time ago where he said, apologetics are not there to create faith. Apologetics is there to defend your faith. And so that's why I say you're studying the Bible first. You're getting the morals and the principles before you, hey, let me ask this question. What difference does it make? Like if you're an apologetic expert, you're an apologetic expert always defending the Bible, but you don't even live, I'm saying like you don't know what the biblical principles are, and you're not living the biblical principles. That's why I say we have to take the Bible first. And I'm saying principles, character traits. Do you honestly think that's how God intends us to study the book of Esther? Well, it doesn't mention God. It's not in the New Testament. It's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. How about we just study the book? And this is what I'm saying. I think that it is more appropriate to start out a study of the book of Esther and ask this question. Who was willing to die for their faith? Y'all, we have this blessing of an absolute marker in our timeline. That is COVID. Y'all, look, seriously, Esther 4:16, if I perish, I perish. So here's my thing. People enter into a study of the book of Esther and they just jump right. Really all it was an apologetics class. They jumped into a textual criticisms class. And they're textual criticism experts. They're apologetic experts. And then they weren't willing to die for their faith. And I just have to ask, what is it if we know all this stuff about the historic text of the Bible, the preservation of the Bible, and then we don't actually read the Bible? We know all these different formulas and all these different ideas about the Bible, and then we don't even read the Bible. And then we don't even make a good job with ourselves, make a determination, do a good job presenting the Bible. What is it? It's not just a law book. It's not just like a historical document, and it's not intended to be chopped down to next to nothing so that we don't have to think, which would be a creed. If I perish, I perish. So everybody teaching a Bible class in the future on the book of Esther, I really encourage you start out asking this question, who in here is willing to die for their faith? And be serious. And let's all just say, at least say, I don't know. Because right now what we have is a collection of hotshot preachers going around beating the memberships over the head talking about, well, if you don't come to every single service Sunday night, the Bible class Sunday morning and Wednesday night, if you don't come to those extras, you don't love God. And if you don't do X, Y, Z, you don't love God. And it's like, wait a minute. That full-time preacher gets paid to be here on Sunday morning. Like, how would he be? And it's always this thing of them beating these folk up. And when we were in class at Memphis School of Preaching, and I'm not talking about the hour where we observe communion together. That is binding. Okay, that is a Christian. Is it a blessing? Yes. Is it a time of reflection? Yes. Do I love it? Yes. But we had Keith Mosier at Memphis telling people, hey, if you got to miss worship, if you have to miss the Lord's Supper communion, if you have to miss Sunday morning worship for your job, Keith Mosier was saying that's okay. And then one day he turned around and told everybody, hey, one week put your whole salary check in the contribution plate and watch how God blesses you. And so honestly, Drew Leonard asked from the audience, from the classroom, he said, how can you, and he said it that way, he said, how can you say that when you're telling everybody that they can miss Sunday morning worship because of their job? He said, if you're going to tell them that they have enough faith to put their whole salary check in the contribution, then why can't they have enough faith to get another job that lets them be at worship on Sunday? And all Keith Mosier did was said, get up and go to B.J. Clark's office. And then they went into B.J. Clark's office and had an argument about it. That's the situation of preaching schools, and that's one reason why I don't recommend them. They're not for thinking. They're for obeying Keith Mosier's orders. If I perish, I perish. Who's willing to die for their faith? During COVID in 2020, we had one of our older ladies, we're seeing people on the news get arrested for assembling with more than 10 people. And one of the things that she said was, well, she said, I thought about it, and I thought, well, if I get arrested for coming to worship on a Sunday morning, she said, then I'll just go to jail with my brothers and sisters who came to worship for the same reason. Are you willing to be fined? Like pay a fine? Are you willing to pay a fine for your faith? Are you willing to go to jail for your faith? Are you willing to die for your faith? I think that's the honest question that you ought to start with the book of Esther. And then I want to say this too. Stop speed reading these Old Testament books and really take some time to think about this and acknowledge it. Obviously, it's called the book of Esther, but I want to make this point that before Esther is willing to die, Mordecai is willing to die. I'm just saying, I haven't heard too much thumbs up to Mordecai. He's just kind of this old man in the background. But this is the picture. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate, they bowed and they reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. And, this is the moment where someone says, well, sometimes you need to count the costs, Caleb. But you know what happens when you spend all your time counting the costs? Your imagination goes crazy, and the cost is always greater than you can bear. Well, let me ask this. If you're making it up in your mind, I need to be willing to die for my faith. Well, then what consequence is greater than that? I'm counting the cost. What cost is greater than dying for your faith? Now, let me say this, y'all. I'm in here with you. Like a moment ago, I said preachers beating the people over the head. It's not like I don't have to think about this stuff. When we had the 2021 tent meeting and the county was giving us such a hard time and they had this nonsensical new rule about on the 8th night we couldn't meet under the tent, and they just were giving us such a hard time. They said we'd be breaking the law if we did it. And so we went ahead and had our meeting that night. And before we got going, we're talking about it, we're making these arrangements, and I was preaching that night, so I said to Dad, I said, if they come out, you have to let them arrest me. Look, I can say this stuff because we're having these conversations and we're living it behind the scenes that you guys don't see. It's local work, and everybody else saw it, but people who don't live here didn't get to see that moment. If they come out here, you got to let them arrest me. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. And what's the result? The result is the man that he did not bow to went home and built a gallows to hang him on. Counting the cost. You're reading your Bible, y'all, and it promotes the heroism. It promotes conviction. Are you willing to, let's put it back up here. And I think this, y'all, about a big thing about America. You have different conversations where people say, what's wrong with the church? They're ignorant. That's not wrong. They don't do this, they don't do that. Well, that's not wrong either. But, y'all, it basically starts boiling down to there is no conviction. And there's a ton of people who will assemble themselves with who they call the Church of Christ, and it is nothing more than their tradition. They inherit it from their grandparents. They don't know what the Bible says, and they certainly haven't looked at why the sectarians do what they do as compared to what they themselves do. And so you have a great lack of conviction. Mordecai has his own conviction. And you know what? When I said about you inherit it from I did a lesson, I don't know if it's on YouTube. Your own conviction versus inheriting it from your grandparents. That's what's called secondhand faith. Does everybody remember campaigns for secondhand smoke? Secondhand smoke kills. Secondhand faith kills. If you don't have it for yourself and it doesn't become a part of who you are, then you can't live like Mordecai lived. This is his. It's his conviction. He lives by it. He dies by it. And a note about it is, too, he's doing it whether anybody else does it or not. That's his conviction. Look, I'm not saying anything to you guys about bowing to Haman when he comes by, but I'm not bowing to Haman when he comes by. Y'all do you. I'm doing Mordecai. That's his conviction. And he's going to be the one paying the price for it. And I think that the thing about it is before Mordecai and before Esther, there was Daniel and Daniel's friends. You look at Esther 2, verse number 6. I made this point previously in another lesson. Jerusalem, This is Mordecai. Mordecai had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah. That means that Mordecai is a second wave captive. Let me have a moment. I just turn this down. Mordecai is a second wave captive. Daniel would have been in Babylon before Mordecai got there. But this is the thing. This is why I say it this way. Mordecai probably would have been there for the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These guys didn't bow. Young guys. And I'm saying the rest of everybody. Are they giving up? That's always how the story is presented. Everybody's giving up. 3 guys in the audience. They don't bow. Well, he's going to know about it. And so you put him into the ruling of the Persians, and Haman comes walking by, and he's saying to himself, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't bow. They put him in the fiery furnace, and God preserved him. I'm not going to bow. He for sure knew about the lion's den because that's a Persian king, Darius. Put Daniel in the lion's den for praying 3 times a day. He kept on praying, put him in the lion's den. God preserved him. God will preserve me. So the idea is you're motivating each other. I had a slide with 1 Timothy chapter 4. Let's look at this together. It's not about outshining each other. I don't participate in a conservatives competition, but when Paul said, let no man despise your youth, but be an example of the believers in word and conversation, charity and spirit and faith and in purity, there is a sense of, I am doing what I'm doing to motivate other people to do what the right thing is. And a lot of my motivation comes from people who have already been doing the right thing. Everybody complains about how bad stuff is. And you know why? It's because nobody's doing anything about it. In the church, in the school systems, everywhere. Local government, everybody likes to complain. Not everybody has a solution. And so Paul says, be an example. Do the right thing. Try to stir motivation. Now, this is what I think is very, very important for your notes. And let's have another moment where I come back over here and I want to readdress this lesson. Did Jesus really preach on hell more than heaven? You know, Christians just have no problem putting so many people in hell because that's how they read the Old Testament text. So, you know, it is just not a 2 + 2 = 4 thought that everybody who died in the flood went to hell. Someone says, well, in Genesis 6, though, it says that all of the earth was corrupt. Well, okay, but Noah is a member of all of the earth. And who thinks that Noah got to be on the boat because he had no sin? It's not that he had no sin. It's that he would be an individual who had faith. By grace, it says in Genesis 6:8, Noah received grace from God. So here's my thing, though. It's not just this necessary point that all of those people had to go to hell. Take it over to the wilderness wandering. It's not a 2 + 2 = 4 type of thinking that all the wilderness wandering people went to hell. Someone says, well, if they didn't get to go into the promised land, then it makes sense that they're going to hell. Moses and Aaron didn't go into the promised land. Do you think they're going to hell? Then it's like, here's the thing too. Why is everybody so set to put King Saul in hell when David was just as bad as King Saul? And in a sense, y'all, David is worse than Saul. Saul only ever committed attempted murder. David actually murdered and adulterated. But everybody's got Saul going to hell and somehow David gets to go to heaven. Going to the Babylonian captivity. Everybody got everybody going to hell that went 70 years in captivity. Ezekiel was in the 70 years captivity. Daniel's in the 70 years captivity. So you're telling me that the prophets of God who did God's bidding and they acknowledged their sin, they're going to hell just simply because 70 years captivity? That is bad thinking. And folk carried that bad thinking from the Old Testament text, and they started inserting it into Jesus, and Jesus did not teach that way. Now, another one where I said, all these people going to hell. Look, y'all, I was hearing in preaching school that Gentiles just went to hell. Who knows what they're doing? Who knows what they do out there? They're all ungodly. No, they're not. When you read Deuteronomy 7, who basically is beyond return? 7 Canaanite nations. That is it. God does not put a decree against every single Gentile nation. It's 7 nations in the land of Canaan. And the Egyptians will help the Jews later on. The Assyrians will help them later on. The Babylonians will help them later on. King of Tyre helped David. Not every Gentile is ungodly. There's a lot of miseducation, bad education happening at preaching schools. But here's my thing. If you just say, well, if you're a Gentile, you're going to hell. Well, then you're probably going to put more people in hell now than ought to be. Before Esther and Mordecai, there was a Gentile willing to die for decency. And that means something. The king, they gave them drink in vessels of gold, and the drinking was according to law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed all the officers of the house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. And on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded his wife, Queen Vashti, to be brought before all the people, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Now, this is a Gentile king, and he's basically involved in a drinking party. And someone says, well, Caleb, these Gentiles don't sound very good to me. No, wait a minute. I am not promoting social drinking, right? Recreational alcohol. No, I'm going to abstain. I'm going to believe what Solomon said, that wine is a mocker and the individuals who are deceived by it are foolish. Now, wait a minute though. You say, hey, here's a dude and he's involved in a drinking problem. The one man that y'all think is going to heaven from the flood, and I think he's going to heaven, but I'm saying you basically take Noah and the flood and say, well, just him and his family going to heaven. He gets drunk coming off the boat. Nadab and Abihu. Leviticus chapter 10. They offer up the strange fire, and then next thing you know, they're getting a mandate from God. Hey, don't be consuming strong drink when you're offering these offerings on the altar. Were the priests involved in such? Look, you can't just look at this scene, and it's not good, but you can't just look at this and say that's the entirety of their existence. It could just be a moment. It could just be a moment of falter, but then here's the next thing. Someone says, yeah, he's having a drinking problem, but look how he treats his wife. He just says, hey, y'all, we're going to bring around y'all to just see how hot my wife is. Everybody get a good look. Here comes Vashti. Wait a minute. This is his wife, and he does that. He says, everybody get an eyeful. David getting an eyeful of some man's wife. Bathsheba is another man's wife, and David just gets an eyeful. I'm just saying, don't reduce these people down to one moment. And someone says, well, why? Caleb, why? Because I don't want you to reduce me down to just one, like whatever problem you find out about me, and you say, did you know Caleb Robertson, XYZ? Yeah, that's not my whole existence. My existence is I have faith in Christ. I should be getting just mountains of credit for my faith in Christ versus y'all trying to reduce me down to one moment. But Gentiles, how does God view them? I don't think God reduced Ahasuerus down to one moment here. But Queen Vashti did refuse. She refused to come in and be, the word is ogled or oogled, however you want to say it. She refused to just come in and be eyeballed by these drunk men. Therefore, the king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. So I say, what's the note about Gentiles in the Old Testament? It's not that we don't know what they're doing. We know what they're doing. We're seeing them. This woman is willing to die for her own, I'm saying, decency, self-respect, and I would say godly image. Women are created in the image of God, and I'm not going to be treated this way. That's some good stuff, right? And so I say, as you're reading this 10-chapter book, you're going through, you're looking at your literature, and you're saying to yourself, what do I need to teach my kids? Y'all. Your kids are going to thrive and grow based on hearing biblical principles from their parents rather than their dad bringing a whiteboard into the house and saying, y'all, get ready for the eschatological diagram. when Drew and I lived together and we were going to school together, we had a whiteboard in the house. So it's not inconceivable that some man out there has a whiteboard in his house. But you get your kids in the room, and this is the thing. Women are beautiful, but they're not just to be lusted after. And so here's a woman with enough decency and self-respect where she says, I'm not going out here to just be eyeballed by these drunk men. Now, killed, banished, either way, it's not good. If it please the king, let there go out a royal commandment, and let it be written to the law of the Persians and the Medes, that it is not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king of Ahasuerus. Either way, I don't, on paper someone says, I don't really want either. I would like to just be respected. And so, either she is put to death or she is banished. Now, ideas motivate. To motivate others and to receive motivation, here it is, be an example of the believers. What do you teach your young daughters? What do you teach your sons? Well, you look at this and you teach your sons, hey, don't be like a dirty old man. Don't just be getting an eyeful every chance that you can, right? You see these dirty old men, just shameless dirty old men. I went into the grocery store one day, and it's like, obviously, I saw it. This girl has short shorts on, and she's going in the store. But I'm talking about this old man stopped walking in the parking lot and just turned around and watched her the whole way. Everybody could have seen him, and just dirty old men. And so you teach your boys to respect women, but you also have to teach your daughters to respect themselves. And if you're getting motivation and you're giving out motivation, Vashti, as a Gentile, was an example to Jewish women, and she is an example to Christian women. And someone says, I'm not going to go out there and be ogled by a bunch of drunk men, oogled by a bunch of drunk men. Well, would you let sober men? What if they're sober? Can they just get a really, really good look and just, do more than admire your beauty? And if you say, well, no, there goes prom season. I had to doctor this photo and put weird effects on it so you could get the idea, and then we all not be getting an eyeful. But here's the thing. Some people would say, well, you ought not even do that much. And you know what? It's y'all's granddaughters who go to prom. Little Sally, whatever you call your granddaughter, little sweetheart, little precious princess, blah, blah, blah. Well, she's going out there and she's giving the boys a good show. Are some of them drinking? Yes, y'all. Some of them are drinking as they go to prom. Don't just be stupid. So some of them already got a buzz or more. And then here she comes showing leg. And y'all, I don't understand. I do not understand how we look at this and say, yeah, they're just teenagers. Yeah, they are teenagers. That's right. Their hormones are raging. And so you say, well, they're just teenagers. And boy, they show so much leg. And men love leg. And then they got these low-cut dresses on. And then everybody's like, hey, get an eyeful. Here it is. And they probably got, and it's like backless. Someone says, well, what's seeing their back? What's seeing your back? Why are you showing your back? Why are you showing everybody your back? Why is it getting so close to your backside as you show us your back? This is y'all's daughters. Like someone says, well, Caleb, you ought not talk this way. Why? Elders' daughters out here doing this stuff. They're the ones living my example, my illustration. I put up an illustration on the screen, and you're like, well, you ought not do it on television, on the broadcast. Why? The local congregation you attend, the elders' granddaughters go out looking like this. And if it's not the prom, it's y'all's wedding dresses are atrocious. This is what I said about I'll never understand groups of friends, married couples, groups of friends that are married couples. And I said this weeks ago, they all go out and their wives are in bikinis together. And basically all the husbands are just getting to see everybody's wife. Hey. Well, on your wedding day, like I'm saying, woman comes out and she said, I have reserved myself until marriage. And they say to everybody, on my wedding night, that will be the only man that I have been with because I kept my chastity until my wedding night. Hey, I applaud you. I really do. I applaud you for that. That's good. That's resolve. That's good. But then you came out on your wedding day and you said to everybody, but here's a peek. That makes zero sense. And it's not like, why is it not a concept to us about, I get it, like strapless breasts are out everywhere, and someone, Caleb, just the way you're talking, y'all live this. You'll go to the wedding and you won't say anything. You'll go and you'll watch this crazy immodest dress and you won't say anything. Now, the other thing is, why is form-fitting not an issue? It's like, well, I mean, showing so much skin. Yeah, but you're also like pouring yourself into it. Y'all do not represent what this woman was willing to die for. That woman said, I will not be objectified by these drunk men. And, you know, American women just love it. Now, let's have a moment where we just talk about, I put a thing over it, so now it's better. Y'all, I don't like the inconsistencies. And I do not like being hard on these people. And I'm saying for being in the exact same boat as a lot of members of the Church of Christ are. Why are so many people Pentecostal? Because they're born into it. Why is it that so many young people, they grow up and they're members of the Church of Christ? Because they were born into it. Now, if we're basically having this conversation of two people who were born into their traditional religions, let's say it this way. Pentecostalism is a man-made sect from the 1900s. A lot of their ideas are clearly incorrect, the tongue speaking and the rolling around and the whatnot. But you know what? Boy, I tell you, their women at least know how to cover up. While we are out here saying, hey, we're the only ones going to heaven. We're the true Christians, and you dress just like the world. And your daughters participate in the same worldly activities. Like someone says, you send your teenage daughters to the young people's Bible class, and the teacher's saying, you ought to be different. If you're a Christian, then everybody ought to know that you got something different about you. And then someone raises their hand and says, like we shouldn't go to prom. You don't have to be that different. Oh, okay. Like we should cover up. Our dress should cover us. We ought to be modest. Well, I mean, you don't want to be a prude. You want to be different, but you don't want to be a prude. Why is that not a thing? Why is that not in our mind? Like we're out here just condemning folk to hell, who in actuality, in a lot of their practices, do better than we do. Yeah, I have been traveling, y'all. I have been traveling and visited with congregations, and remember that story about the woman going in the grocery store and she was clearly wearing short shorts and the old man stopped and got a knifeful? I've been traveling and see women and their teenage daughters come into Bible class looking just like that woman, short shorts. It is just gross hypocrisy. What are you teaching a Bible class on Esther? Well, yeah, this ought to come in. Discreet and chaste from Titus chapter 2, verse number 5 ought to find its way into a study of the book of Esther. To be discreet, to be chaste, and to have good conversation. Married women have good conversation with that's lifestyle, with their unbelieving husbands, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. And many Christian wives in America do not have a good lifestyle in front of their unbelieving, unchristian husbands. Vashti was a Gentile, and she put on a good lifestyle in front of her Gentile husband. Do you give her any credit? Do you read in your text? I'm saying 10 chapters long, fantastic literature, art. It's art. And you get in there and you say, Gentiles just go to hell. What? You talking about this godly woman? This woman of a good conversation? This woman of discreet and chaste character? She can't be circumcised. What do you want her to do? See, like that's what I'm saying. They're just, not only has it been, like I said a moment ago, just bad thought in the Old Testament readings, but then there's been like no thought. What do you want her to do? Her options are quite limited. It's do what the king says or be killed. And men don't live that. I'm saying common men don't live to such drastic measures, and yet they have the audacity to judge this woman. Now, let's move off of her. Let's get into Mordecai. Let's talk about some of that hard judgment. There's a lot of premature judgment that goes on about people. This is Mordecai and Esther. So they banish or they kill Vashti, either one. they do that, and then they basically say, well, we need a woman to come in and replace Vashti. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and many maidens were gathered together in the palace. They bring these women in. They basically start going through the process of getting these women ready to be presented in front of the king. And it says here, out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids into the best place of the house of the women. That's going to be Esther. But look at this. But in verse from 8 to 10, look at what it says. Premature judgment. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So Esther goes before the king, and she receives the greatest amount of favor. And the people who were working with her, it said favor for her from everybody. The people who assisted the women, and then the king himself. But here's the thing, she didn't tell anybody she's a Jew. Oh. And then you skip over teaching that Vashti is a good woman. And then you come in here and you start telling everybody, now, you can't be ashamed of who you are. And if you're a Hebrew and you tell people you're a Hebrew, and we can't be like Esther who came in and for fear, she hid herself. She didn't tell anybody I'm a Hebrew. Well, the text says Mordecai told her not to do. Well, maybe it's not Esther, but it's Mordecai. Mordecai ashamed? Mordecai ashamed where he comes from? Mordecai ashamed of the laws of God? We can't be ashamed of the law. What if it's just the case that Mordecai knew if they found out she was a Hebrew, she'd just be disqualified from even possibly being queen? It's not about being ashamed of God. It's not about being ashamed of the law of God, but it is such a thing as being wise as serpents. Look, we're going to keep this to ourselves until a later date. Why? It's possible that you wouldn't even get into the running if they know you're a foreigner. And also the idea of premature in Esther chapter 2, well, is Mordecai ashamed? Well, if you get over to Esther chapter 3, you're going to find that he's telling everybody he's a Hebrew. The king's servant, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's commandment? Now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. I'm a Hebrew. I'm not going to bow down to a man. I'm a Hebrew. You will hear things about fellow Christians. Right, Romans 14:15. But if your brother be grieved with your meat, and now walkest thou not charitably, destroy not him with thy meat, for whom Christ died. You will hear rumors about people that Jesus died for, and you will not only just say, oh, how horrible, I never would have thought. But not only that, then you'll start spreading that rumor around to people of an individual for whom Christ died. Just like individuals in chapter 2 say was before they finished reading the story. Was Mordecai ashamed of who he was? Was he ashamed of God? No, he's telling everybody he's a Hebrew. That's just individuals who judge prematurely. Now, let me have a moment here to introduce to everyone's thought. You got your baby Bible, you got your King James Wide Margin Bible, you got your notepad. Everybody needs to learn to live by Deuteronomy 19:15. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of two or at the mouth of three witnesses shall the matter be established. So you got one individual telling you a story, I'm not hearing it. And I've told people on the phone, like, I'm not listening to this. They call up and say, Brother so-and-so, XYZ, I'm not hearing this. I'm not taking a one witness anything, Deuteronomy 19:15, and then say, well, Caleb, it's true. I'm not hearing a Deuteronomy 19:15 one witness tale. And then they start in, well, you calling me a liar? You might be telling the truth. I'm not necessarily calling you a liar. I am saying that you're in violation of Deuteronomy 19:15. Prematurely judging based off of what? Not even having all the information. And that's what people would do to Mordecai. And then they start asking this question, was it necessary, Mordecai? And I'm wanting to introduce some thought on this too. You're going to have people view you, and they're going to judge you, and you're going to make life choices, and they're going to say, was that necessary? Well, what's it matter to you? That's why I said again, you guys are doing you, and Mordecai's doing Mordecai. But that's not good enough, is it? No. So, Mordecai does not bow to Haman. He will not bow, and he will not give him reverence, says Esther chapter 3. Well, this is what I said. You know, he probably knows, Daniel chapter 3, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow. He for sure would know about the lion's den. I just want everybody to know this for your notes, okay? This is just a tidbit from me to you. 2 Kings 5, 17 and 18. You know, it is the case that just because you decided that right now is the time for you to die for your faith doesn't necessarily mean that it's the time for everybody else. And, you know, you're going to do what you're going to do. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it might be the case that you're right and they're wrong. It very well may be that way. But I'm just asking the question this morning, do you know that 2 Kings 5, 17 and 18 is in your Bible? When Naaman, that's confusing. Haman? No. This is 2 Kings 5. Naaman, the Syrian captain. He was a leper. Well, he goes and he finally does dip himself 7 times in the Jordan River. When he comes back, he starts talking to Elisha about some of the duties of his job. Naaman said, "Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burden of earth, for thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord." So he says, look, I'm done with idols. I am done with idols. But look what he says in verse number 18. "In this thing the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, I bow myself down in the house of Rimmon. But when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon the thing that thy servant in this thing. Pardon me when I do this." Mordecai is willing to die for his faith, and that is upstanding. I don't know that that's necessarily a condemnation to any of these other people when they bow down to Haman. I mean, you're going to have, if like I say, he knows Daniel 3, well, he's also going to know Daniel chapter 6. What does Daniel say to King Darius? Darius comes to the lion's den and he says, "Daniel, did your God deliver you?" And then Daniel says, "O king, live forever." He's the king. He's acknowledging him. Maybe it's the case that Haman was asking for more than bowing that I'm just ignorant of. But I am just asking everybody, do you know that this is in your Bible? Do you know that there is a man who said, look, I am going to have to bow down because of my job. I'm going to bow down in this idol's temple, but I'm not worshiping the idol. Which is going to be the same thing that Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and 1 Corinthians chapter 10. The idol's nothing. What your faith is what counts. You're getting meat that came out of an idol's temple. Paul said, don't even ask about it. That's just a note. And this is important. This is another note that's important for later in our class. So Haman comes in after Mordecai won't bow, and Haman says, there's a collection of people, and they have these very distinct rules, and they don't follow our rules. And he said, they're a threat to the society. It's a better idea that we just go ahead and exterminate them. And Ahasuerus just says, you want to do it? And Haman actually says, I'll pay to do it. That's good. So Ahasuerus says, okay, write it down. And when you have it written, he says, here's my ring. You seal it with the king's ring. And then it does this. He seals it with the king's ring, and it goes out, it's official government document, and then it's published in every province of all the people. This is super official, and everybody knows that Haman's decree went out with the king's ruling. We're going to wipe out Israel inside of the Persian Empire. Now, I want to have a note about this. Seal it with the king's ring. In my Bible, in Ephesians chapter 1, verse number 13, I have a note to Esther, not only in chapter 3, verse number 12, sealed with the king's ring. I have a note in Ephesians 1, 13 to Esther chapter 3, verse number 12, sealed. Look, it's the stamp of approval. And I say this, look, having an indwelling in your body that nobody can see, that does nothing for you, is not a stamp of anything. You're just telling folk, but it's not a stamp. Now, in Acts 19, when they spoke in tongues and they performed miracles, that's a stamp. What's the other option? Someone says, well, I thought it was like sealed, that you'll never fall away, you're sealed in a Ziploc bag. Yeah, but when you get over to Revelation chapter 2, he's telling the Ephesian church to repent, or their candlestick will be removed. So I don't think we can say it's going to be sealed up like a Ziploc bag. Now, give me one moment. I have to step off screen. I'll be right back. And like what I've said in the past, sometimes you're teaching school and the principal calls over the intercom or something like that. Now, here we are. This is going to be important later in the conversation. Haman gets to put out a decree. He gets to put out a decree with the king's ring as the sign of approval. I have the king's seal right here. Now, here's some more premature judgment. When Haman, all because Mordecai won't bow, Haman gets to issue this decree of just, and you have to think about this too. These people just came out of 70 years of captivity, and now they're already facing national extermination. And so if you're a Christian and you say, it feels like it's just one thing after the other. I'm having to deal with this. I'm having to deal with that. I don't get any time to get my breath. I tell you, that's how I feel. I do feel like it's just one thing after another, and you don't get a moment, and it's like, some kings in the Bible, they had a window of peace, and then some other ones that just they came into their time as king fighting, and they died fighting. Here they are. We just got out of captivity, and now we're already getting a whole nother scene of national extermination. And so when Mordecai hears that Haman has put out this national decree, Mordecai perceived all that was done. Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And he came even before the king's gate, for none might enter to the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And someone reads this text, and here's the thing. Someone reads it, and they say to the classroom, now everybody, this is just a moment where Mordecai should have had stronger faith. And someone says he should have at least consulted with the book of Daniel, chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Daniel told everybody, you're going to come out of captivity, but you're going to have more wars. More people are going to come up against Jerusalem, and God's going to deliver you. He said, you'll be hoping with a little help. Remember that? And it's in the Bible class teacher says, and this is just a moment of weak faith. Wait a minute. No, you do not get to look at somebody and say that an initial response constitutes lack of faith. Knee-jerk reactions, well, you should have had more just inner fortitude to resist even giving. What? Putting on sackcloth and ash is making an appeal to the Lord. This is not, and I'm saying, y'all, this is not, these ideas are not off the wall. This is the stuff that people put into books, they put in their articles, and they teach at lectureships. Mordecai had a moment of weak faith, and sometimes we have weak faith. I do not think at all that he's having weak faith. It's going to be his idea. Mordecai, like I said a moment ago, remember I talked about the Pentecostals and modesty? These preachers who, you have heard me say this business of I'm going to heaven on Sunday, but I'm headed to hell by Tuesday is unbiblical. And here's the thing about these preachers who keep teaching these tough guy sermons. Oh, tough guy sermon at the lectureship, and I'm telling everybody they don't love God and they're going to hell. These people, these preachers, tell the membership to live one way. They're up here saying Mordecai had a moment of weak faith. How many preachers are willing to get fired for what they really believe? I think it was when my brother was in school. I know it was when he was in school, but I'm saying I think it had to do with Forest Hills Vacation Bible School. At the time, Forest Hills Vacation Bible School was about superheroes, Iron Man and whatnot, and I don't know if that's even what my brother was talking about, or more so my brother was probably talking about letting females teach in the VBS over like a mixed audience. And he's trying to get a meeting with the elders, and it's not happening, and he's talking to different instructors and whatnot, and that's going on. But now as I'm thinking about it, it wasn't even that issue. Micah preached something at a congregation out in an area called Munford. It's either Mumford or Munford. He taught a lesson at Munford where he said the Church of Christ is going to heaven and sectarian groups are not. And some people didn't like that. And if my memory is correct, that's the scene where Bobby Liddell told about Micah, we're going to handle this at the school level. Nothing happened that I know of. Like, I don't know that Bobby Liddell even brought it up to Micah. But here's my thing. Later on, the preacher, like the real located preacher at the Munford congregation, saw Micah and he knew about the whole spat that went on. And he just said to Micah, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And that's what's wrong with these preachers. That's what's wrong with the schools, is these guys go through school, they get a piece of paper from the school locates them in a congregation, and then they turn around and say, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Well, the elders don't feed me. And the school doesn't feed me. I thought we were all out here praying to Jesus for our daily bread, or praying to the Lord, to the Father for our daily bread at the behest of what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6. Give us this day our daily bread. And then you turn around and say, well, the local congregation is the hand that feeds me. And they just let all this stuff go by. How is it possible that the Memphis School of Preaching individuals heard a sermon that said the Church of Christ is going to heaven? And Bobby Liddell says we're going to handle it at a school level. And the local preacher says, well, you bite the hand that feeds you. I thought that's what everybody in the room thought. See, that's what I'm saying. This business of preachers not being willing to be fired. And y'all, I'll have a moment with you. Do I lose support? I do. I have. And so you just basically start saying, that's gone. You know, whatever it was monthly, or maybe sometimes people make an annual contribution. But that's gone. And I also operate in a scene where I do stuff and it causes my dad to lose support. And so that's not good. And so you basically say this about the located preachers in these congregations. They have basically a scenario where if they make one misstep in their mind, one misstep and my whole salary will be gone. Well, I make multiple steps and I just watch my salary chip away is the difference. So you can see it go all at once, or you can just kind of like watch it and just kind of see it deteriorate over time. And then I'll say this though, because I'm saying my point is I'm trying not to beat up on people. And I do think these located preachers are a problem, and these unqualified elders are a problem, and the schools are a problem. But when I said a moment ago, these guys, these preachers who are not willing to be fired, and then they tell the membership to live a certain way, that's inconsistent. Now, someone says, well, Caleb, you've never been fired. Well, I did just say I have watched through the years, people get mad at me, have to have conversation with them. I told one preacher at a Texas congregation, he's basically rattling my chain on the phone, and I just said, if this is about support, let's just say it this way. Okay, y'all don't support me anymore. But now we'll continue having this conversation if you want to, but I'm not going to be like threatened with support. And he started going, oh, no, that's not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. Well, we finished that conversation, and then a little while later down the road, my funding was cut. So it kind of was that maybe. So I do that. But I don't want to be out here and be tough guy. But I am saying these are the biblical principles, and we do have preachers that are preaching one thing and they're living another. We have these located preachers who are afraid to lose their job. They have their principles that they don't stand up for, and then they preach really hard at the membership, and I just don't go for that. And that's why I say him having this moment where he puts on the sackcloth is not a lack of faith. He then goes and he tells Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews, for if thou altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And he's able to say it. Someone says, well, that's big talk from a man asking a woman to die. He's got a gallows being built with his name on it. He's living it. Look, I'm living it. I'm asking you to live it with me so that we can save the nation. Now, I will make this note. I get it. I get it. The people who say, God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. So at this moment of Esther chapter 4, I would just make a note, like, let's not go crazy. I'm turning through my non-chronological Bible. In Esther chapter 4, so when a Jew says to another Jew that we are waiting to receive enlargement and deliverance, I get it. The word God is not in the book of Esther. But look at Psalm chapter 4, verse number 1. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. So when one Jew says to another Jew, we're waiting to receive enlargement, it's credited to God. Here's another one. Look at Psalm 32:7. When one Jew says to another Jew, we'll receive deliverance. Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Thou shalt compass me with about songs of deliverance. David in the Psalms. Deliverance. Look at Psalm 121:1. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. So I hear them when they say, the word God's not in there. Yeah, but it's one Jew to another Jew saying we're expecting enlargement and deliverance, and God is in that. And that's not, someone says, well, you can't hang your hat on that. Well, I'm not even looking to get into a fight about that. That's like, these are clearly righteous people. So, anyway, look at Esther 5:9. What do you teach to your kids? You got this in the Bible. What are you going to teach in the Bible class? I said it's classic literature. Haman is a character who has so much going on. I will say this too. I read a book on my couch some time ago. Remember I said people who read. So I'm doing as much reading as I can. Then I go home and I'm reading some more. I read this book a member of the church wrote, and they were quoting the baseball player Yogi Berra, and I'm just sitting there laughing out loud about these Yogi Berra quotes. And as I was reading through Esther to get ready for class, I find myself laughing at Haman. If this book was called the Book of Haman, it would absolutely be a comedy, just like, you watch stuff with a filter. Okay, you watch movies with a filter. And so I halfway don't like that old Bill Murray movie called What About Bob? Because it's a movie where everything goes wrong. It's supposed to be funny, but it can actually be stressful. Everything just goes wrong. And if you're reading, like I'm saying, if it could be called the Book of Haman, if you were reading the Book of Haman, it would just be a dude who is really in love with himself and nothing works for him. And it's always unexpected that Mordecai just keeps popping into the storyline unexpectedly. And so I think in that sense, when I say it's classic literature, in its own way, Haman's storyline is absolutely a comedy. Now, I think it's important to think about your Bible reading that way. But here's Haman. Then went Haman forth that day joyful. Why? Because this in chapter 5 is where Esther says, she says to the king, I'd like to hold a banquet just for you and for Haman. Haman loves it. He went away that day joyful with glad heart, but when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, that he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the prince and the servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself, and tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Can you imagine, I get it, someone says, hey, with your friends, you celebrate with your friends. Yeah, you do celebrate with your friends. This is odd that the man calls everybody and says, I'm now telling you, I'm announcing to you my accomplishments, but I'm also announcing to you how I cannot enjoy any of them. It's not just his wife. He's got these other people. His friends are here. I can't enjoy any of my accomplishments because this one Jew who won't give me respect. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. And you just sit down with your kids and you talk to them about how worthless the praise of men is. 1 John 2:16, you talk to your kids about 1 John 2:16. One day I'm going to get it straight. I grew up hearing that. Did Elvis Presley die on the toilet? Because I was raised up hearing people say, Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll and he died on the toilet. And what they were saying was like fame and fortune doesn't mean anything, if you basically rot out. Was he drugged up all the time? Was he depressed? Pardon me that I don't know all the details of the story of Elvis Presley. But 1 John 2:16 says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but it is of the world." And y'all, it is difficult. It is difficult to just fight this. You hear people talk about, I got a hard time with this, I got a hard time with that, I got a hard time with this, got a hard time with that. It's in the world. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. These three things, we're all dealing with it. And I don't know, did he say it? Did Kurt Russell say it's hard to be humble when everything about you is perfect? That's how, look, we just think we're great. And you get these different passages and 1 Corinthians 8, knowledge puffs up. You think you're the smartest person that's in the whole church. And it's like you might be the smartest person in the congregation. I don't know that means too much. But you just have these different markers for yourself and you get yourself feeling good and, on and on and on. And really, you sit down and you talk with your kids. And the idea ought to be, when you're reading the Bible, and that was something I was going to say about Mordecai. How is it that back on this slide, how is it that we're judging the good guy? Haman is clearly the bad guy, and I've had multiple notes on how Christians could get in the story, and they're picking apart Mordecai. Mordecai's the good guy. There are good guys in the Bible. There are good guys in the world today, but in a sense, when you're reading the Bible, who is the good guy? God is the good guy. And even the good guys in the storyline of the Bible, they fail God. It's difficult, and we're all dealing with it. And you might say, well, I'm not this bad. Okay, though. But do you still have things about the pride of life that are actually keeping you from enjoying things that God would say enjoy? Enjoy your wife. Enjoy your husband. Enjoy your kids. Enjoy the fruit of your labor. I don't think that the Bible teaches us to be depressed. And I have said this, I think it's salve of the human soul. God's grace, I think people need to get into their heads that God is gracious and merciful, and they need to start living it that way, living their life that way. But you sit down with your kids and you say, this is what covetousness will get you. If you can't learn to be content, and you can't learn, like I'm saying, if you can't start living your life that climbing whatever type of social ladder you think is there, and y'all, there's a social ladder in the church. And my faith and my Christian life is not about climbing the social ladder of the church, and it's not for you either. And I think that people who ascend on the church's social ladder get up to the top and say, this isn't even good. It's the wrong idea, wrong mission. And you really need to teach your kids that a bad wife selection will kill you. So he comes in, he tells everybody how much he hates Mordecai, and his wife says, then kill him. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I have to look at Mordecai sitting in the gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all of his friends unto him, then build a gallows to be made 50 cubits high, and on the morrow speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go in merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Boy, how come I didn't think about that? That's a good idea. I mean, I'm the second in command of the whole nation. I'll just kill this dude. Look, y'all, in the story of Esther, you have two women, and you have one woman who is willing to die for the people, and you have another woman who advocates you murdering somebody. It absolutely matters who you marry. And let's see it. Proverbs 31:30, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Now, it's possible you find a woman who fears the Lord and she just so happens to also be beautiful. The Proverbs is where we get that phrase, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. But the biggest thing is a good woman. You want a good woman who believes in God's ideas of marriage and how marriage ought to be. And you get a good woman who believes how the home ought to be according to the Bible. You get a good woman who actually cares about spiritual things. And like the church, y'all, I hear Christians talk about the church as just, that's their weekend obligation. But it's not like life with God's people. And that is what fellowship is. It's common life, not like common as in low sitting, but it's commonality that we share together. Fellowship is the commonly shared together life with God's people. So you find a woman who loves the Lord's people and cares about fellowship and cares about the Lord's work, or you just get some woman who's always complaining about how she wants to keep up with whatever the world's doing and she's involved in worldly activities. And not only that, she's pulling on you to be involved in these worldly activities. She's pulling on you to not raise the kids the way that you know the Bible says they ought to be raised. Can I have a moment of like a excursion? And here it is, a wife willing to die or a wife that encourages murder. The two different women in the book. It was asked to me recently, Shakespeare. Someone said, hey, is there a Hurlbut Story of the Bible version of Shakespeare? And there is. It's by Charles Lamb. Charles and Mary Lamb. It's called The Tales from Shakespeare. And if you get that, then it will basically be written in such a way it's for young people. This was marketed for young people, like kids, teenagers. Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb. And that's basically call it the Hurlbut's version of Shakespeare. And they said, if I could find a Hurlbut's version of Shakespeare, I might do some of that Shakespeare reading. The only reason I'm saying this right now is Haman has a problem and Zeresh says, just kill him. So if you read Shakespeare's play Macbeth, Macbeth is trying to find out his way on what he ought to do. And his wife's solution is, just kill this man. Just kill him in his sleep. You want to read stories that make you say, what would I do in these situations? And the person who says, well, I know I wouldn't kill him. That's what everybody says. All these people. I'm a government official. I'm not just going to abuse my power and hang this person. That just means you haven't hated anybody enough yet. Someone says, I'm not going to do that. Well, that means you just haven't seen enough. Like in Macbeth, he's prophesied that he's going to be king and has all this stuff. And so it's like, maybe the prize hasn't been made big enough for you to do it yet. What would you do if your wife advocated such to you? What? Or would you just be Adam in the garden saying, this is my wife, and she's suggesting this to me. So, Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb. That's like a Hurlbut's version of Shakespeare. Look at this. We had this note. God's not mentioned in the book of Esther, but they do. One Jew to another says we are expecting enlargement and deliverance. Now, you leave chapter 5. We're going to build a gallows for Haman, or for Mordecai. And then in chapter 6, y'all, I don't believe necessarily in trying to pinpoint every single thing that happens in a person's life and say, that's God's providence. That's God's providence. And I certainly do not want to start trying to figure out and articulate God's providence. And I do believe that when it's said, at some point you start trying to dissect how providence works so much that it's no longer providence, it's just you. But y'all, you talk about coincidence. That while all this, like I said, is drama, we're somehow trying to figure out this plan. Esther, Mordecai, we're trying to figure out how to save the whole Jewish nation. And all really Haman cares about, like he would kill a whole nation just to kill one man. And he still can't figure out what to do with that one man, so we're going to kill all Jews, plus we're going to hang him. It's going to be extra awful. And then, while all this is brewing, it just so happens that the king can't sleep. You're the world power. King of Persia, Ahasuerus, you are the world power. You're the second world power in Daniel's colossal image. You're the world power. You got a beautiful wife. You got a second in command who seems to be on the ball, and your wife is now planning you this banquet. It seems like everything is relatively good, but you can't sleep. On that night, the king could not sleep. He commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles that they were read before the king. And he can't sleep, so he says, I'm going to catch up on some business. That's what he's doing. He's reading current events inside the kingdom. I can't sleep. I want to stay up on top of things. What do men do? Men do today. I can't sleep. They get up, they go out, and they start watching ESPN. Woke up, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep. I'm going to turn on ESPN. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep. I'm going to go out here and watch videos about firearms. 3 o'clock in the morning. You get what I'm saying. If you can't sleep, do something that's going to benefit you, because ESPN sure ain't benefiting nobody. He couldn't sleep. He says, bring me the current events. And it was found written that Mordecai had told these two individuals, the king's chamberlains, that an assassination attempt was laid against Ahasuerus. And so what Ahasuerus reads is Mordecai informed on other people of an assassination attempt. And the king says, hey, what did we do for Mordecai? Like, he saved my life against an assassination attempt. What did we do for him? Then said the king's servants that ministered to him, nothing. He just did it. So he sees this. And while the drama is brewing, he can't sleep, and now he has good favor towards Mordecai. Haman comes in to the scene, and the king says to Haman, what would you do? What should we do for the man who has great pleasure in the eyes of the king? And Haman just assumes, and I'm saying like just his comedy, oh boy, this just keeps getting better and better. I'm getting a banquet from the king's wife, and now I come in, and the king's saying, who has great favor? This is what you ought to do. And he says, we're going to do all these great things for him. And I tell you, in Esther chapter 6, he can't sleep. And I want to make one more note before we move on about providence. We all know the phrase, shoot your shot. Just try. Shoot your shot, man. People who rise up to try never know. And I'm saying we always imagine bad things. Well, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. If I do this, this will be bad. We don't even know what could possibly take place. Like, it's beyond our imagination when we start trying to think about doing the right thing. We do the right thing, and good results that follow can be beyond our imagination. And I do want to have a moment to talk about God's providence inside the Bible. Do you know that when Jacob sends Joseph out to find his brothers in Genesis 37, his brothers are out keeping the sheep, and Jacob says to Joseph, all the brothers hate Joseph, and so Jacob says to Joseph, hey, go find your brothers, see how they're doing. So he sends them out, and he goes out, and he comes to Shechem, and look what it says. Go, I pray, see whether it be well with your brethren with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out from Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man finds Joseph wandering in a field. And the man said, who are you looking for? He says, well, if he has to say I'm Joseph and I'm looking for my 11 brothers. What if that man hadn't been out there? Would Joseph have just, said, I can't find these guys. There's 11 of them. There's just one of me. I'm going to go home and tell my dad I can't find him. This unnamed man, what's he doing out there? I don't know. What are you doing out here? What are you doing out here? And this man plays his role in that whole drama. What happens? This man finds Joseph wandering a field. Who are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, the sons of Jacob. He tells them where they are. He goes to his brothers. They sell him into Egyptian bondage. Boy, if that dude hadn't been in the field, my brothers wouldn't have got a hold of me, and I wouldn't be down here in jail in Egypt. But then the famine comes in, and he's promoted to the second in command of Egypt. If that dude hadn't been in the field, and the dude hadn't told me where my brothers were, then I wouldn't be here during this time of famine, and now I have the ability to save my father's house. 1 Kings 22:34, shoot your shot. Just try. We got problems that happen inside the church, and young men, they say, and I'm saying literally, a young preacher, only 2 years older than me, said to me and my dad, what can I do about it? Who am I? What can I do about it? A certain man drew a bow at venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness, where he said unto the driver of the chariot, turn your hand and carry me out of the host. I am wounded. One man opposite the king of Israel in the battle, he just raises his bow. I got an arrow. We'll see if it hits. Just boom. And out of the crowd, with your one arrow just shot at a chance, you hit the king of Israel. On this one night, I just couldn't sleep. Before I'm supposed to have a banquet with my wife Esther and the enemy Haman, I can't sleep. So I read the current events. One man wandering in a field says to a young man in the field, "Who are you looking for?" One man just shoots his bow. You don't know what God can accomplish by using you. Someone says, "Who am I?" Well, you're nobody, but you are trying to do God's will, and that's something. Now, back to Haman. While Ahasuerus is reading the current events, and he says, what did we do for Mordecai? And they said, "Nothing." He then says about his outer court, he says, "Who's out there?" And the people said, "Haman's out there." He says, "Tell Haman to come in." Haman comes in, and the king said to him, "What shall be done to the man that the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than myself? And so he starts building up this elaborate parade for a man that the king honors. And then Ahasuerus says, "Okay, we're going to do it for Mordecai." And I'm saying, if you're talking with your kids about the book of Esther, it's a lesson in hearing the whole matter. Look, don't be answering questions that you don't even know are being asked. He assumes that Ahasuerus is talking about himself. This is exactly like 2 Samuel. Nathan comes to David and he builds this picture in front of him. He says, "There's a rich man. He's got loads of flocks, and he's got a guest coming in, and instead of killing a lamb from his own flock, he goes to a poor man who really has got one ewe lamb, loves the ewe lamb, and this rich man takes it and kills that poor man's lamb. What do you think we ought to do about it?" And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said, "As the Lord lives, that this man has done this thing shall surely die. He will restore the lamb fourfold, and then he's going to die." And then Nathan says, "You're the man." Well, if I had known that's what we were talking about, I would have answered differently. Now, here it works out in a good way. Here, this is not good. This is Haman's fault, basically answering before he's heard a matter. Same thing happens in the kings. Remember, I can't think of off the top of my head who the king was. The king was supposed to totally wipe out his opposing army. And instead, he allows the king to live, and he maybe destroys some of the people. But a prophet disguises himself. He bruises himself up. He bandages himself up, and the prophet comes out to the king, and he says, "Hey, I was in charge of a prisoner, and he got away from me." And he said, "Now I'm asking for your help." And the king says back, "That's your business. You decided your own." He said, "I'm going to be killed if I don't do something about this prisoner." And the king says, "That's your business. You brought your own judgment on yourself." And then the prophet unwraps himself and he says, "Back to you. You brought your own judgment on yourself. You're supposed to execute this king, and you let him go." Well, if I knew that's what we were talking about, I would have answered differently. So it's a lesson in make sure you know what the information is. Hear the whole matter. That's Ecclesiastes chapter 12. So let's get the real picture here in front of us before I start talking. And then the Proverbs would actually tell you, you might do better for just not talking at all, holding your tongue. Hey, I don't actually know what we're talking about here, so I don't feel comfortable having a comment. Okay, that might help us out. And you're studying with your kids, and we already talked about the pride of life and the praise of men. Esther 6, verse number 12. Mordecai came to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning, having his head covered. Now, when you're looking at all this, you see how quickly the tables can turn and how quickly the shoe can be on the other foot. You're reading all this for yourself. He's super upset. He thought he was about to get this big lavish reward from the king. He's going to another man named Mordecai, and this grown man has to run home. He's so upset. "I'm taking my ball, I'm going home." He has to run home. He's so upset. And you know what? This is the scene that Mordecai was in, I would say 3 days earlier. It's in the text, it's 3 days later. 3 days prior, Mordecai had gone out, rent his clothes, and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went in the city, and he cried aloud with a bitter cry. Not for selfish reason like this man. He's going out for the state of all of his people. This is what's going to befall our nation, so he rips his clothes. This man goes home. I'm saying it's like you're looking out and the grass is always greener. Look, this grass is the same as this grass over here, but it's really not. This is the better circumstance. This is for righteousness. This is for selfish gain. And so you have these talks with your kids. Look, this is what life is going to look like. You're going to be eyeing what these other people have, and you're going to want more than you already have. And if you do that, then you're just going to always be in this endless pursuit with yourself. And the last thing, y'all, I recommend this book a long time ago. It's just a novel, but it's called The Professor's House. And the professor in the story, he's got 2 daughters. One is very wealthy, and the other one's basically doing all right. But he basically realizes that one daughter is jealous of the wealthy daughter, and she just cries to him. And his response is, he doesn't like hold her and say, there, it's okay. His immediate response is, you cannot allow yourself to be envious. And he said, because the envy will consume you and do nothing to her. I have to say, I don't know how some parents are out here making it when they don't read anything. I don't know what you think you have to offer to your child if you don't have anything cooking up here. I'm not trying to be ugly, but y'all, I'm saying there should be no greater influence to the child in their childhood as the mother and the daddy. And if mom and daddy ain't got nothing going on in their head, I don't know what you're giving them. And these are the things that set them up. You cannot afford for your own self to be envious. You cannot afford to not learn and try to practice contentment, because you'll just end up running out of this place crying because you didn't get something that went to another man. And this dude's got a wife at home. You put it with this note, they praised and crucified Jesus within 7 days. And it's unfortunate. Existence is unfortunate in that you hear people say that an employee will work harder when they receive, praise and encouraging words than they would just by getting a raise. We love to be appreciated, but the appreciation is meaningless. Well, what type of sense am I supposed to make with that? I don't know. There's another Shakespeare character, and they're talking to him about doing the honorable thing, and he said, what is honor? Air, meaning I can't feel it and I can't see it. And so he does the unhonorable thing. But in some sense, you do have to weigh this out. The same people who praise Jesus are the ones who crucified Jesus. He's looking for praise, and he just can't seem to get enough of it. And then that bad wife again. He comes home mourning with his head covered, and then his wife says this. Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends, when the thing that had befallen him, then said his wife and the men, Zeresh, unto him, look, if Mordecai be the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but thou shalt surely fall before him. And then this is where Haman says back to his wife, this was your idea. And now his wife's saying, oh boy, if you're talking about Mordecai and he's a Jew, this ain't going to work. And you know what? You kind of have to make a note out of this. Eating the fruit was Eve's idea. For Abraham to give birth to a son from Hagar was Sarah's idea. And then she immediately doesn't like that idea that she just had. Ahab wants Naboth's vineyard, and Jezebel says, you're the king, just kill him. Y'all know what I'm saying. Heads of the house need to basically shoot down bad ideas when they hear them. No, I'm not doing that. I hear your reasoning, and I'm hearing you out, but I'm not doing that. That's just a side note, and you ought to be teaching it to your boys. And then you get in there and you start having conversation. This is the church. This is the home. This is the workplace. You know how you do conflict resolution? You're going to have to learn to be precise. You have to avoid those terms like you always and you never, and just say what the problem is. And that's exactly what Esther does. What do you teach with your kids when you're studying the book of Esther? What do you teach in Bible class? Esther comes in and she speaks very plainly. She has the people in the room. These are the people who need to be here. This is the king, this is the villain, and I'm here to talk about the problem. What's the problem? Very exact. We are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed and to be slain and to be perished. Here's our problem. And then the king says, well, who's doing this? And then she says it's the adversary, the enemy is Haman. That's it. And a lot of times what happens in elders' meetings and men's meetings is people don't want to speak plainly. And so what they do is they spend 15 minutes or more beating around the bush, and then someone finally has to say, well, Ted, we still don't know. We still don't know what's bothering you. And then Ted says, well, I've thought of every way I could have told y'all. And Ted just got endless homespun analogies that don't mean nothing to nobody. And someone says, Ted, just tell us what you're upset about. That's what she did. The Jews are set on the chopping block, and I'm a Jew. Well, who did it? Haman did it. Now, I will recommend a book to everybody because not every situation is like this. There's a book that everyone needs to read called Question Behind the Question. The question does not always, like, something is broken. Who did this? That doesn't always have to be the response, and that doesn't always do anything for us. The question can become, how do we avoid this happening a second time? Because what's broken is broken. We cannot repair it. We are going to have to buy a new tool. But how can we avoid this a second time? But in some matters, it does come down to who's at fault. We're set to be destroyed, and he did it. So when I said the people who need to be there, they are there. And that's Matthew 18:15. If you have a personal sin, this is a personal, private sin. If your brother trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. You got to speak plain. Nobody's talking about being ugly. But if you go over there and you spend 30 minutes with him, and then when the meeting's done, he's like, well, I don't even know what you came over here for. You're going to have to tell him what the fault is. And if he won't hear you, everybody that needs to be there, you're going to have to take 2 or 3 witnesses with you. They are not witnesses to the private offense in verse number 15. They are witness to the fact that you are trying to reconcile with this person. There it is. The people who need to be here are here. Things that need to be said are being clearly said so that we can actually move forward. Speak plainly. You're going to teach that to your kids. And teach your kids. You know when mercy is basically looking its best is when you're the person who needs it. And the book of James says that mercy begets mercy. And, Jesus said, you be merciful to other people and my Father in heaven will be merciful to you. Mercy begets mercy. So in Esther 7, this man is ready to wipe out an entire nation. And when he's caught and when he's exposed, Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther at the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. And the man starts begging. Just the most awful man. Right? You got a wife at home, you're second in command, everything's going for you, and you just hate one old dude who sits in the gate, and you're willing to kill a whole nation to get rid of him, and then you have the audacity to beg. Now, we say it in those terms, but in that sense, that's what God's looking for. Some people wouldn't beg. And we all know the song, I ain't too proud to beg. But there are some people that they will go to their death not admitting they're wrong and certainly not looking for what's right. And the people who humble themselves, that is what God's looking for. And a moment doesn't actually equal a lifetime. In Matthew 18, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like this. A servant who owed he owed a large debt. This first servant owes a massive debt. And he falls down at the Lord's feet and he worships him and says, Lord, please have patience with me and I'll pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him his debt. It's forgiven. You don't even have to pay it back. It's just forgiven. But that same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I'll pay thee all. And he would not, but he cast him into prison till his debt should be paid. I do think we're all going to struggle as we go through life, and different people have different sins, and people who have the same sins might have them in different levels of increments. I think that the most disgusting thing before God is for us to not forgive each other. It's absolutely what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6. Jesus said, my forgiveness hinges on my ability to forgive other people. And so when you find him begging, that's what you have in Matthew 18. And when you find a person begging like that in Matthew 18, God forgives them. And the idea is that God is better than us. Clearly, God is better than us. So when we look at a scene and we say, oh, Haman, has he no dignity? Well, that pride going out the window and I'm begging now. And that's called humbling yourself. It's like we tell people they need to have humility, and then when they start begging, now you ain't got no pride. It's ridiculous. It's a whole lesson telling your kids, man, saying vengeance belongs to God. And you teach your kids how you can end up falling in your own ditch. You make this big orchestrative plan on how you're going to get back at these people. And they already got you once, so you're trying to get back at them. And then as you're trying to get back at them, you fall in your own ditch. You get hung on your own gallows. The king says, what are we going to do? And then somebody speaks up and says, hang him on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. And the king said, that sounds good. Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. And then was the king's wrath pacified. And Proverbs 26:27 says, whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. You reap what you sow. You go out just looking to tear into folk, you ought to expect folk to tear into you when the right time comes up. And that's how it is. You should really be making yourself avenues to cover for people. You know, be their advocate. Try to help them out. I mean, if you're not helping anybody out and you're just cutting everybody and leaving them hanging to dry, then you're going to have a list of people looking to do the same to you. You'll fall in your own ditch. Now, this is we're at the end, but somebody says, well, what are you saying, Caleb? The book is just there. It's in the middle of the Old Testament so that we can have the moral of the story. What's wrong with that? It's a fantastic story. There's not a single prophecy in the book. What's wrong with that? That's what we need. We need moral of the story. What? I had said it at the beginning of class. What is apologetics? You said the Bible is true. The Bible is true, but what's apologetics if you come out with no morals and no character? Then you just say, well, I didn't come out with morals and character, but I probably think everybody's going to hell. Romans 15:4, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. I love the moral of the story, and I'm glad that God wrote the Bible the way that He did. Because as I said, this book is entertaining. Not a single prophecy in Esther, but I will say this, it does show that God delivers on His promises. They just all got noted in Daniel 8, verse 8 through 12. Yes, we did just make it through Babylonian captivity, but guess what? More's coming. And you know what? God's going to be with us. There it is. Coming down in Persia from a man named Haman, and all of that worked out in such a way that the man who looked to kill Haman was hung on the own gallows that he built for Mordecai. How? They took a chance. Mordecai tells her, go in, don't tell anybody you're Hebrew. She gets married to the king. This decree comes out. Why? Because Mordecai, the same man having to work the plan, wouldn't bow, and now everybody's paying for Mordecai's decisions. Well, through the courage of Mordecai, I'm saying the conviction of Mordecai and the courage of Esther, the nation's going to be saved. And I'm saying all this being done with God's enlargement and deliverance. So someone says, so what, we got it just for the moral story? Well, I don't have a problem with that, but I will say this. I think there's more to it. I think that the book is in there so it will fix our bad thinking about Gentiles. I think it's in there to fix our thinking about Gentiles, which fixes our thinking about God's grace as a whole. Before Mordecai and Esther, there was a Gentile woman willing to die for her decency. Here's Esther 8, verse number 5 and 8. Remember I said earlier that Haman got the king's ring and he made a seal, and the note about it was these things, once they're sealed in Persia, they cannot be reversed. Daniel chapter 6, remember that? They bring Daniel in front of the king, and the people say to the king, remember, you issued out a decree, and it's the law of the Medes and the Persians that you cannot go back once a decree has been made. Well, look what Mordecai says. If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman. And this is what Ahasuerus says. Write you for all the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name, sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Now, you look at the rest of the story of Esther, and they are going to have to they do some fighting in the city. And the Jews are going to kill about 75,000 Persians who come against the Jews. So while it may be the case that he does not just overrule Haman's decree, he set a new decree in place and said the Jews get to defend themselves. And they did. And they killed Haman's sons, and then they killed 75,000 enemies of Israel. But you know what happened? Remember earlier in about chapter 3, when Haman did that, he sent the copy out, and who got it? Esther chapter 3, verse number 14 says, every province and all the people heard about the decree. So every province and every people heard that the king of the Persians was going to execute the Jewish nation. But now they're saying all the provinces and all the people are hearing something is changing for the people of Israel inside of the nation of Persia. If it pleased the king, just like in Daniel 6, he's making these new ways. Esther 8:13, the copy of the writing commandment be given in every province, published unto all the people, and the Jews should be ready against the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So they are going to fight, but here's my thing. This is Romans chapter 2. Some teacher tells you, we don't know what Gentiles did in the Old Testament. Yeah, you do. Gentiles were being influenced by these people. Gentiles were not just wicked and atrocious. Vashti was very good. Darius ended up being good. Nebuchadnezzar was good. Now, go back to Esther chapter 3 and look at verse number 8. Everybody recognizes that the Jews are different. Haman said to Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are diverse, and they don't keep all of our laws. And you know what? The king makes a new decree. They're able to defend themselves, and then they do. And what do all the people see? When the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness in their thoughts, the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. From the Exodus up till Esther, Jews influenced the nations. These people do not have an innate moral compass. Everybody has been introduced into the exact same playing field. Education. The Jews had to be educated in the book of Exodus. They got all these Egyptian practices. Get them out of here. And they're studying Numbers, Deuteronomy. They're educated. Then they come into the land of Canaan. They place themselves. And when David comes on the scene and Solomon comes on the scene, they're educating the world. The Queen of Sheba comes up and sees Solomon. She says, the half hasn't been told of all your wisdom. Hiram was a lover of David. They are influencing the world. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Jeremiah, they influenced Babylon. And now what do you have? You have Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther influencing the Persians. That's Romans 2. So when you look at these people and you say, well, what did God think about these people? God was very concerned about the Gentiles, and that's how. They were influenced to do good, love God, love their neighbor, just like the Jews got out of the law. Every province, all people. This is Gentile evangelism is what I put in my wide margin. Romans 2:14 and 15. Here's Esther 8:15. Mordecai then goes out in the presence of the king in royal apparel with a great crown of gold, with garment of fine linen, purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. There it is. There's more exalting of a particular Hebrew. What is that? That's more Gentile evangelism. They're getting influenced by these Hebrews who, Esther chapter 3 said, they have different laws. Well, Deuteronomy 4 says there is no nation that has such great laws as the nation of Israel. Esther 8:17, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. There it is. But you have to ask the question, they became Jews how? Romans 2:28 and 29, for he's not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart and in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not of men but of God. They became Jews. Well, Jeremiah chapter 4, Jeremiah is a Jew telling people who are physical Jews. In Jeremiah 4, he says, y'all need to circumcise your heart. Well, if that's what makes a Jew, then these people's hearts changed. Anybody could get in here and argue that that's about their flesh. Okay, that doesn't change the fact that their heart has to change. You can't just snip the flesh and then it's all good. Their heart had to change. These people were influenced by what? The laws and the conviction of the people. Laws of God, conviction of the people. Esther 9:27, the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all such that joined themselves unto them. There it is again, Romans chapter 2. By nature, phusis can mean long-standing practice and customs. Long-standing influence by the Jews. We circumcise our hearts. We join ourselves to these people. That's Romans chapter 2, and I think that's why Esther's in the book, is to teach us what God thinks about. Number one, sure, God delivers his people. But I'm taking away and saying who are God's people? It's not just the flesh, it's the heart. And God was concerned about Vashti, and he was concerned about Esther. Esther 9:4, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater, and that is more influence upon the Gentiles from a Hebrew, and that is God's orchestration. And I think a closing note is that the captivity did in fact work for the Jews. The captivity was not about sending people to hell. The captivity was about changing them. And they changed. Because when they institute their feast day, the day of Purim, the days when the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. You know who they abused before they came into captivity? Isaiah 1:17 says, relieve the oppressed. Amos 4:1 says, these people oppress the poor and they crush the needy. Habakkuk 3:14 says, their rejoicing was to devour the poor secretly. And when they leave their captivity and God delivers in the book of Esther, what do they say? Let's say, we're going to have a feast and we thank God. Let's remember the poor while we do that. And that's Galatians chapter 2. James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to them. They gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the heathen and they to the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which also I was forward to do. You come out of these texts and what is it? Love God, love your neighbor. Galatians 6:10. We see those individuals, help those individuals who have need. These are Christian virtues. Why is Esther in the Bible? Number one, it is good literature and it's entertaining. Number two, we pick up the moral of the story and it makes us into better people. That's why it's in the Bible. 276-806-3641, calebgrobertson@gmail.com. Email me to get on the informer list, Page and a Half Bible article, and let your friends know about what does the Bible say on YouTube. We love you. God bless you. Keep asking, what does the Bible say?